A lot of kids who have any kind of sensory processing issue, no matter how mild or severe, when the sleep becomes less deep, those sensory areas are tuning into things in the environment, or that brain is going on the prowl looking for more stimulation. So a lot of times, again, like parents could use all the things that they did in the beginning of the night. They can try to use all the comfort methods, all the tools. But again, it's a sign that that brain is either getting too much of something or not enough of something during the day. And we need to figure that out for, that particular child. And ultimately, once we do figure that out and we can get that system in balance, all of a sudden, those 3-hour wake ups that are happening every single night, little by little, are happening less and less.
Hi, welcome back to Mother's Guide Through Autism. I am Bridget Shipman, and I am your host today. I want to welcome Melissa Doman. She is a sleep coach, and you're going to learn so much about what could be going on. Why is my child not sleeping? So you're going to want to tune into this episode. And Melissa, as a sleep coach exclusively for children with special needs, she has 14 years of experience teaching parents of children with a variety of diagnoses, including autism, ADHD, ADD, cerebral palsy, and trisomy 21, and more. Melissa has helped hundreds of families by providing lasting solutions for their child's sleep struggles. Her goal is to make sure that every child can succeed and thrive on a great night's rest. You don't want to miss this episode. You're going to be able to take so much knowledge, hope, and inspiration from Melissa. So enjoy this episode and welcome, Melissa. I'm really excited about our guest today. Melissa Doman is a great person that's going to give us so much information and drum roll about sleep. So as I coach moms, one of the big things that I get is my child's not sleeping. I'm not sleeping. I don't know what day it is, right? Because we're all so exhausted. So you get your typical ideas, routine, you get all that information, but Melissa is so full of knowledge, and she's going to be able to help us so much with our kids getting sleep. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we did a little chit chat before, and I can tell right away, a connection. I can tell you're such an awesome person. And so that I think is going to come through in our interview. And I can't wait to, like I told you earlier, to learn from you. And just like I love to learn things, and this is going to help me help moms too. So, would you tell us what you do and how you came to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, basically, what I do is I teach parents how to get their kids with special needs, regardless of diagnosis, how to sleep well, sleep independently for the long term without melatonin and without medications. I've been working as a sleep coach now for 7 years, but I've worked with kids with special needs for, I think it's going to be 15 years now in May. Now I'm starting to lose track, unfortunately. But and honestly, like the way I came about helping parents with sleep was similar to you. I kept getting questions from the families that I was working with in my clinical work. And for me at first I was like, I don't know. Like, and I was like kind of like throw things out there, let's see if it sticks, see what
Yeah.
happens. But for myself, when a problem continuously comes up, like for me, it's like, okay, we gotta problem solve it. We got to figure out a solution. And ultimately that kind of led me on a search through, sleep training for kids, certain sleep training methods, things like that. And I realized very quickly how it can be applied to kids with autism, CP, trisomy 21, you name it. And I think ultimately, obviously it depends on what method you go with, but ultimately the method that I learned about, it was like, hey, we respect kid as kid, and we're going to guide them through this process. We're going to make sure that they can be successful with it and win with it. So ultimately, I got myself certified as a sleep coach. And now here I am 7 years later, and having helped several hundred families, I think, at this point, specifically with sleep. So I've seen a lot, been seen a lot
Yeah.
of different things. And, every family is a learning experience. There's always something new, even at this point, which I love. It always keeps me on my toes and keeps me problem solving, which I love.
Yeah, I would guess with each family that you help that there's something to add to what you all this knowledge that you have. It just keeps piling up, right? I think that's what I notice about working with people, with moms, with kids on the spectrum is that, we've all, I think, pretty much heard the quote, if you've met one autistic person, you've met an autistic person.
Right.
So I would guess what you're saying is, we're all individual,
Mm-hmm.
no matter why you're not sleeping, there is a why.
Yeah.
And using your methods and building upon what all this knowledge you already have, I can't imagine how great that must be to really take a child, a person, figure out their why, and then, talk about big. I think sleep is so big.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think especially for my kids and my teens and young adults on the spectrum, unfortunately, a lot of people, a lot of professionals look at that and it's like, oh, they have autism. They're just terrible sleepers. Sorry, like nothing, and for me, that's never a good answer. I'm like, okay, that's a bunch of malarkey. And, I think ultimately with my approach and what I've taught my other coaches who now work with me is like, we need to strip that diagnosis away and just see like, okay, what can this kid do? What are they not doing yet? Right. And how do we really highlight the things that they are successful with and capable of, and just building from there. And I think particularly with kids with autism too, the assumption is like, oh, they just don't need as much sleep, look how much energy they have, blah blah blah. And what I've learned over the years is like, no, actually, that's insane amount of sleep debt, and it's coming out as dysregulation and balance problems and language issues, blah 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 blah. And once we get the sleep handled, all of a sudden these kids who don't need that much sleep are now sleeping 10, 12 hours a night. Like, the potential is all there. And I think a lot of parents, when they come to me, they've been kind of told the same old shtick of like, oh, they're just autistic. Oh, they just don't need a lot of sleep. Here's some melatonin. Here's some meds. Like that's it. And nothing can be further from the truth. There's so much that goes into sleep, and having that kind of individualized approach to it. Ultimately, we'll find success with a good night's rest. Yeah.
Well, and and that like even, when my boys were infants, the sleep deprivation was just like, okay, I know they're probably going to sleep at around 8 weeks. So I can do this. So, you help yourself get through those rough times of no sleep, but I was one of the fortunate parents that Joseph did actually sleep.
Yeah.
He didn't nap as long as my other, but he slept through the night, yay. And so I cannot imagine any of our listeners that are sleep deprived are like, okay, tell me what to do. So can you tell us what your method, what the Doman method is?
Sure. Yeah. So my approach with sleep is basically kind of twofold. So the first part of it is we have to take a deep dive into like, all right, how is this child actually falling asleep, right? What is the help that parents need to give? What is the routine? Like, what are the things that we can go through with a fine-tooth comb and allow for that space and opportunity to learn self-soothing strategies, self-regulation strategies? Because I would say probably at least 85% of the kids that I work with, when you dig into it, they probably need mom or dad in some way to get to sleep. Now, sometimes it's super obvious, like, parents need to co-sleep, they need to hold them, they need to, tuck their hands under mom in a very
Yeah.
particular way. And it's right there and we're all aware of it. But sometimes there are other subtleties to it, right? Like even just having mom or dad sitting in the hallway to go to sleep. Yeah, maybe they don't need to physically be there, but parents are still kind of roped in. And ultimately, when a child knows their own self-regulation and self-soothing strategies, getting to sleep is a lot easier, but also maintaining sleep through the night is a lot easier. Because a lot of kids, what happens is they wake up and they're like, wait a second, when I was falling asleep, mom was right here next to me, and now she's not. Like, maybe I should go find her. And that process happens over and over again. So again, there are certain modifications and changes that we have to make, but we only make one, maybe two changes at a time, and allow space and time for that child to process and understand, like, okay, this is the new way of doing it. And once they're successful with it, then we go to the next step. So that's a part of it. The second part is really looking at what that child needs from a neurodevelopmental standpoint in order to make sleep better. Because I mean, I've tried it both ways, where we only do the behavior approach or only do the neurological balance stuff. And they both need to be working together. And I think that when it comes to teaching good sleep for a child, especially if there is something neurodevelopmental going on, we have to take that into consideration, because like the brain is the command center. If something is going on up here, we're going to see symptoms of that in many different areas, including sleep. So, for example, specifically for my kids on the spectrum, we will have a conversation about, all right, what are the sensory regulation activities we can do during the day so that they can really calm down and settle down from a long day of ABA or therapy or school or whatever. Like, what are the needs that we have to meet, and what are the things we maybe need to avoid to keep that sensory system in balance? We talk about physical activity, because as much as like we need to burn off a certain amount of energy to go to sleep, like we can absolutely overdo it as well. And for a lot of kids, that need for movement, and whatever that movement is, that's also often a sensory seeking behavior, right? So it's a matter of balancing that out. We talk about nutrition. I mean, I would say probably about 50% of the kids that I work with in general have some kind of digestive issue, whether it's constipation, loose stools, whatever. So with certain sensory perception issues on top of that, that can feel very uncomfortable. It can feel very different from how you and I maybe experience that. So we have to make sure that that child is getting what they need to just generally be more regular, but to make sure that they're getting, vitamins, minerals, the macronutrients they need for a good night's rest. And I'm sure you come across this a lot, Bridget, but for my kids who are picky eaters, we can almost guarantee like they're not getting the things they need for a good night's rest. So essentially that's my approach. It's like, all right, let's talk about the routines and the things that we can put in place to encourage independence and better self-regulation. But we need to help the brain and body in all these other ways too, to see that long-term success, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I know that there is so much to it. And so thank you for kind of laying the foundation with the method that you use. And I'm just curious, like, what are there, particularly with autism, are there common patterns that you've noticed? Like, what are some of the more common sleep I don't know what the terminology is, I guess.
I just say sleep
Struggles.
struggles. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say, like, off the bat, probably the most common sleep struggle I see with kids on the spectrum is anywhere between 1 to 4 a.m. They're just up. They're just up. And they can be up for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. They could be starting their day at 2 a.m. Right. And that is one I've heard so many times over the years, whether a family works with me or not. It's just that is probably the most common one. And it doesn't matter. Often it doesn't matter what parents are doing, at least initially. Like, they could give a snack, they can put them in front of the TV, give them a tablet, like let them run around in their room. It's literally the brain just doesn't even know what to do with itself, and eventually that child like crashes and they go to sleep. But in my years of doing this, what I've kind of learned is that, not kind of, I have learned, is that, essentially around that 1 a.m. or so time, our sleep cycles are shifting. So we're going from like really deep restorative sleep to lighter stage sleep, still just as important for a number of different reasons, but it is lighter stage sleep. So for a lot of kids who have any kind of sensory processing issue, no matter how mild or severe, when the sleep becomes less deep, those sensory areas are tuning into things in the environment, or that brain is on the prowl looking for more stimulation. So a lot of times, again, like, parents could use all the things that they did in the beginning of the night. They can try to use all the comfort methods, all the tools, but again, it's a sign that that brain is either getting too much of something or not enough of something during the day, and we need to figure that out for that particular child. And ultimately, once we do figure that out and we can get that system in balance, all of a sudden those 3 hour wake ups that are happening every single night, little by little, are happening less and less. Child is maybe up for 45 minutes rather than 3 hours. I think for a lot of parents, that's a big win. So I would say, like, by far that, 1 to 4 a.m. big middle of the night wake up is probably the most common issue that I see. If it doesn't happen in the middle of the night, it might, that issue, that problem with going to sleep and initiating sleep can also be there. I mean, a lot of kids on the spectrum I work with, it might then take them 2 or more hours just to settle. And then still, even that, like, throughout the middle of the night, things are still really fragmented. But I think sleep onset and connecting sleep cycles are probably the biggest struggles.
Yeah, yeah. So is there a common sensory when you're relating to sensory issues? Is there a common one that you've noticed as you're working with these families for kids on the spectrum?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to say if there's like a commonality, if I were to say there was a commonality, it's usually dealing with like the tactile or like the proprioceptive system. So like tactile, just like having the feeling input in the body, but on that deeper level, wanting that stimulation on the joints, having that pressure, things like that. So often those kids are the ones who, first of all, want to co-sleep with parents. They need to have that pressure contact, but they're also the ones who are maybe seeking deep pressure during the day. They're flipping themselves upside down on the couch, they're throwing themselves into things, they're constantly on the go, jumping, things like that. So I would say, like, if there was one commonality, that's usually where I might find it. But that being said, I have certain kids who will headbang for hours, or they get too much visual input during the day. They're very sensitive to sounds, and that's what triggers those big middle of the night wake ups.
Yeah,
So but
yeah,
it's a hard, because I mean, the sensory system, there's essentially 8 different pathways. So trying
yeah,
to diagnose that in a sleep training plan, like, maybe sometimes we just have to start with like activities to just get the body to just feel generally more calm, and then little by little we can add or take away things, so that we know, again, that that child's sensory system is in as balanced as we can possibly get it.
yeah. As I work with moms, I'm like, it's very, and I understand what you're saying. It's very difficult to have your one go-to, right? It's kind of like really the parents come into this part, I would guess. It's so important to get that information from them because it helps you help them. So anyone who's listening is like, okay, I need help. Can you, yeah, I can feel it already. And then we haven't even released this episode because I get so many parents who are struggling with this.
Yeah.
So, can you walk us through, like, they want to work with you, or what are some practical steps that you can give anyone who's listening right now?
Sure. Well, look, my first recommendation is to kind of start with the basics, and it's not even necessarily putting changes into place in the way your child falls asleep or anything like that. Not yet. With every family that I work with, we always do prep work, and it's usually around figuring out the right bedtime routine, picking like the one like most important sensory regulation tool that we can do with a child, and really start making certain, like, sometimes we need to make certain schedule changes, but sometimes we just start with like the really basic sleep hygiene things, but we make it work for that child, right? So for example, like with a bedtime routine, yeah, I mean, this is usually the one where parents are like in the call, they're like, yeah, I got it, like tell me something else. That's so
Yeah,
tell me
yeah.
something else that's new, right? But oftentimes for my kids that I work with, I think probably the biggest surprise parents find is that my bedtime routines are almost an hour long, if not a little bit more, because again, we have all these other little cups to fill. We have these buckets that we need to fill so that their brain is better regulated, satiated, whatever, to get to sleep. So, in addition to just like the usual stuff of like bath, brush teeth, put your PJs on, whatever, you might want to first look at like what specifically your child needs from that sensory standpoint, just kind of based on like the external cues that they're giving you, right? So, if we have a child who's constantly on the move, maybe we don't want to get into like really rough, like rough housing or play or anything like that, but maybe putting them in the sensory swing or doing something with a very gentle compression where they're still getting some movement, still some activity, can be great. One common activity that I use with a lot of my kids is joint compression massage. It's a way for us to kind of hit both needs of the tactile, the external, but the more internal proprioceptive need as well. This is specifically for kids who actually just like need someone physically there with them, right? Because I've found over the years that a lot of parents who are trying to make that separation and that independence, now we have this void of like, okay, now where's my input, right? And I learned very quickly, like, if we're going to take something out, we need to fill that void in other areas. And again, like doing that bit of joint compression massage, or some families, I don't hear it too much anymore, but like the Wilberger brushing protocol and those things, like those are all great bedtime routine activities just to meet that need a little bit more, so that when we go to build on that and talk about independence, we know, okay, for the last week or so, we've really been meeting that need and satiating that sensory seek, whatever that may look like for that particular kid. So I again, like, to go back to the bedtime routine, you need to make time and space for that. And I think what like specifically for my kids with autism, I find that depending on especially what their therapy program might look like during the day, allowing for like that little extra wind down is going to work gangbusters for you. I mean, it's often so like overlooked, but I mean, some of my kids that I work with, they're on like 20 hours, 30 hours for, like, they're almost working a full-time job of ABA. So
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that, like, and that amount of demands and that amount of concentration and stimulation that they're getting, like, if we are not giving them a decompression outlet at the very least in their bedtime routine, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So anything that we can be doing that both helps meet that sensory need, which is calming and relaxing, again, is going to greatly help with, I mean, first of all, just like initial onset of sleep. I've had some kids who, in a week, they go from 2 hours on average to go to sleep to like 30, 45 minutes, just because we're meeting those needs so immediately. So at the very least, it's going to help parents have just a more settled, calm, relaxed kid going into bed. And hopefully what that means is that like the pathway into sleep is a little bit smoother for them as well, even if it's not perfect. So I think starting there is a really, really important step. And of course, like with scheduling, that one might be like, sometimes that one's a little bit harder to figure out. I always tend to feel like a little bit earlier is better for a lot of my kids that I work with. But if you're not really sure, I encourage parents at first just to start writing down, like, what time did I put them to bed? What time did they actually fall asleep? To start getting some hard evidence of like, okay, it's taking, at least 30 minutes to go to sleep. That's okay. Maybe we stay there. If it's taking any more than that, like over 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever, that might actually be a sign we need to go earlier, because in my experience, anything over 30 minutes usually is a sign of over tiredness rather than under tiredness.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so even just like a 15, 30-minute shift in the schedule just to go a little bit earlier
Yeah,
can make a big difference in that regard. But if you, again, for those parents out there who are maybe not sure, just write
yeah.
it down for a week and see what comes up, and figure it out, from there, what those little adjustments might be.
Yeah. So how, parents listening, how do you know when it's time to get help? When is it time to call you?
That's a great question. I think that for the families that, like, I mean, look, some families are very quick to it, and they're like, okay, this has been 3 weeks of this and I've had it, like finding somebody. um but I think that for parents in particular, that's a question that they need to ask themselves. First of all, like, most parents, when I talk to them, they know, they can see the exhaustion on their child's face. They know that their child is struggling. But I think the bigger question is like, how are you doing? Like, if you are feeling exhausted, you got to do something about it. So even if it's only been a few nights, like, start looking into it, see what you can do to maybe start righting the ship a little bit. But for a lot of parents who are listening to this, it's probably been months, years,
Yes.
day one that the sleep has been an issue. And I think especially for special needs parents, they, in many ways, like, they run through life on a, like, glass, not half empty, but like, from an empty vessel. Like, they're running on fumes. They kind of take pride in that sometimes. But I think that if your own sleep debt is now affecting work the next day, how you are as a caregiver for your child, this is the time to reach out. Because again, like, a special needs parent, doesn't matter what their child's diagnosis is, it's like they wear so many extra hats compared to a neurotypical parent. They're IEP specialists, they're part-time lawyers, nurses, chauffeurs, therapists, like, you name it. So, and I know it's very hard for parents to try and prioritize that, but like, if you're feeling the least bit tired or exhausted, like, now's the time to get help with it. Because for the long term, it's it's going to not only help you just be a better parent and be well rested, but in the long term, of course, it's going to help your child with how you're present for them and your focus on them, and just generally helping them through all the developmental changes that are coming as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore with you. And that's why I do what I do, because, you know, it's hard. It's hard sometimes when you are running on empty to be able to even, stop and go, okay, this isn't working, but you're so used to it. It's like you get into this vicious cycle of, you just try to keep going. So I think it's really, really important to take a second there and say, okay, if you're one of those parents, you just heard that. If you are running on empty, it's time to pause and say, okay, yeah, you do a lot, and yes, you're a superhero. We all know that, but I often say even superheroes need to refuel. So getting rest, I think, is the number one step to take towards that.
Yeah.
So this podcast is all about knowledge, hope, and inspiration. So I would love to offer some hope out there and inspiration. So can you share some of your success stories that just come up for you that you love to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first one that comes to mind, and she always comes to mind, there was a kid I worked with. How long ago was it? I'm trying to, COVID time, it's like everything's
Yeah.
a mush. I don't remember at this point, but it was probably about like 3 years or so ago. And this kid had, the mom reached out to me. She's like, look, we've done melatonin. We've been on 5 different sleep medications. They had gone to a very, very, very prestigious sleep clinic. And I'm not going to name the place because I don't want to get you in trouble. But they went to a prestigious clinic and they said that this is the only way to do it. And on my first call with the mom, I asked her, how does she fall asleep? And this mom had to hold her really tightly and rock her for 3 hours straight to get this kid to sleep. And I was like, so you're telling me that all they've suggested to you were melatonin and these 5 different medications? And like, I think at that point, this kid was 4.5, and I think they were already talking about trazodone with her, like just like sedative, like straight up sedatives to get this kid to sleep. And I said to her, I was like, so you went to this prestigious sleep clinic and all they told you was medications and this is how she falls asleep? And mom was like, yeah. And we got to a point where this kid was completely independent with her sleep. We still had like a smattering of middle of the night wake ups. She had a lot of sensory things going on, but the mom was just like gaga. She was just like, I had no idea my kid could do this. And again, like she's such a perfect example of what I think parents have been told over and over and over and over again. And just a parent just saying, no, that's not the answer. Right. And not, what's the word? Not, I don't want to say giving in, but like kind of not giving into what the doctors are telling them about her kid. So like she's the one that always stands out to me still to this day. And I use her story a lot when I'm talking to other parents too. Now, more recently, I had a family, they had 2 kids on the spectrum and 2 totally different profiles. The older boy was talking, very hyperactive, like sensory overwhelm. And then the other boy was not yet verbal, kind of chill, but like very sensory seeking. So like, you have, you kind of have like 2 sides of the spectrum, like represented in these 2 kids. And the mom, like the first kid was up for 4 hours every single night. And then the other one was up every hour and a half, like just needing a pat or reassurance from mom.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, and we probably worked together for close to 12 weeks. Now, granted, it was 2 kids, but both these boys were extremely anxious about mom leaving their side and not having somebody there. And we had some growing pains with it too. Like I recognized with the older boy, there was one step that we took was like a bit too much for him. And we we had some backlash. The mom called me the next day. She was like, he was up for 6 hours last night. What do we do? I was like, oh, buddy. Okay. So, and look, sometimes in that process, even when I think is like, it's the most gradual step, like you're going to get blowback, but this family, like they kept it on track. They stayed consistent with it. And now both boys are basically sleeping through the night. I think the younger one who was just needing like that pat reassurance, I think maybe they have to go in once a night. And the other one, he might come and check on mom and just be like, hey, where are you? And she's like, I'm right here, go back to bed. And then he just goes back. And these guys were really interesting too, because about like 6 or 7 weeks in, they both all of a sudden, after having like a couple of great weeks, just the S hit the fan and we couldn't figure out why. And I told parents, I was like, look, I think we may have actually worked off a bit of a sleep debt and they don't need as much melatonin. So as soon as we reduce the melatonin, all of a sudden these big long middle of the night wake ups that had stopped and then come back again stopped again. And it was just a sign that the body was like, all right, I'm done with this, the over the counter stuff. Like I don't need it anymore. So I think with the oldest boy, I think we actually managed to get him completely off the melatonin. I think the youngest one was just like on a small, much, much smaller dose. than what he needed initially. But it took a while. And again, like I learned things from both of those boys in the process, but they're in like a complete night and day place. And again, I know that there are many families that I work with now, like especially over the last few years, where it's not just one kid with a neurodevelopmental diagnosis, like there are multiple things. So to be able to see like two kids kind of like totally different,
Yeah.
neurodevelopmentally, to both have that kind of sleep success. I mean, it's really the parents. I mean, the mom and her partner did an outstanding job with those kids. They were so good. So I mean, I could take credit for it, but they did all the work. So.
Well, I think that that's, the piece that I notice, as a parent, it takes such a huge level of commitment to make changes, right? To really create your new normal, whether it's emotional, healing your heart, or whether it's getting your children to sleep, you to sleep. And so I just have so much love for these parents, right? Me being one, but not having sleep to me, I mean, that's really a big game changer.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so that's so I mean, what you're doing is, it doesn't, like when somebody would it doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but to me, I would think it's one of the biggest things, the biggest stressors and health issues, and everything comes
Yeah.
from lack of sleep, right?
Yeah,
So,
well, exactly. And actually, when I finish with families, I have them fill out a feedback form. And one of the first questions I ask is, before going through this with your child, how many hours a night were you sleeping? And I think on average, my parents get like I think it was like a 4 hours and 15 minutes of sleep a night. Like I look, I'm a sleep coach. Occasionally I have bad nights. I had a bad night last night, and I'm still like, I'm still very cloudy. And that's just one night, right? So to have these parents with all the things that they have to worry about and they have to stay on top of during the day, I mean, it's commendable what they're capable of doing on an average of 4 hours a night, right? But so I asked that question very, very strategically. And then, later on in that little questionnaire, it's like, all right, now how many hours of sleep are you getting? And I think on average now my families are getting like close to 7 hours. I think parents went from like 4 hours and 15 minutes to like 6 hours and 45 minutes, something like that.
yeah,
um and I
that's
mean,
huge.
yeah, it's huge. I mean, getting those 2 extra hours, I mean, would I
Mhm.
like it to be closer to 8? Of course, but I
Yeah.
think for a lot of parents that, just quality of life for them as caregiver,
Mhm.
I mean, it's game changer, absolute game changer.
It is.
And it's great.
That's
And I get
yeah.
to see the change on parents' face. Like I work with families for up to 8 weeks, and you see like the physical transformation of them is also pretty cool. Like I should start taking before and after
You
photos.
should.
um, yeah, it's fascinating. It's yeah, it's great.
I love it. I love it. It is so it is hopeful for our listeners. And do you want to just do you have any other advice that you'd like to throw out there to our listeners today?
Yeah, I think you know what I would urge again, because I know the population of parents who are listening to this. My piece of advice would just be, if you've been told there are only certain ways to get over the sleep, or that there really isn't something to do about it, I invite you to just come back to it and look at all of it as from a place of curiosity of like, okay, like maybe what's one thing that we might be able to change just to start putting things in the right direction. My advice to you is like, look, if you've been told there's no solution or this is all we've got for you, like I invite you to just say, no, maybe there's something else I can do. And whether that's, following some of the things I talked about today with maybe it's just starting with like a more sensory friendly bedtime routine, or figuring out that, that ideal schedule, or heck, just, emailing me, calling me after you listen to this.
Yeah.
I I invite you to change the mindset a little bit. Because there are definitely solutions out there, even if it's not necessarily me that you come to. Like, there are absolutely other things you can do to help your kids sleep better.
Yes, there's always hope, and I always say there's always a why. There's always a why. And so I know moms struggle, parents struggle with so many things. And sleep deprivation is just gonna pile on all the stress and overwhelm that you all are experiencing anyway. So our listeners are gonna want to know, how can I find you, Melissa?
Yeah. Well, so you can find me. My website is melissadomansleepconsulting.com. You can also find me and my team on Instagram. Our handle is Special Needs Sleep Coach. So on Instagram, I'm posting reels and tips and all sorts of stuff for parents to get started with. So I'd say, like, those are the best two places to reach out. Either, find us online through the website or through Instagram.
Okay, and as we release this episode, we'll also, let everyone know how they can find you, because I imagine there's some really exhausted parents that are listening to this right now. And I would especially like to thank you for being a guest on A Mother's Guide Through Autism, and would love, I know that there are layers to this, and you did such a good job at giving us the baseline. So I would love to have you back to give us a little bit more information that I know that you have to share with us.
I would love that. I would love that. Yeah. There's only so much we can talk about in one podcast episode.
Exactly.
But if you'll have me back, I'd love to talk about it and take a deeper dive for sure.
Okay, well, we will definitely do that. And for all of you listening to this episode, if you liked it, you felt like it was helpful, please like and subscribe to Mother's Guide Through Autism so that we can help all the moms out there, all the parents out there, anyone who is listening that is looking for answers, especially knowledge, hope, and inspiration. And thank you for listening. And I will see you in the next episode. You all have a wonderful rest of your day and get some rest.